Now, we've all experienced ups and downs in our life, right? These moments where we're really happy, ecstatic even, and moments where we're quite gloomy and down. It's just the way things go sometimes. But what if these little ups and downs suddenly became massive mood swings, ranging from mania to full-on depression, where someone can be perfectly fine one day, then not wanting to get out of bed or even live anymore the next? This is what bipolar disorder does to people, and today I'll be discussing what the disorder is itself and how its understanding has evolved throughout our history. First, we'll uncover its understanding in more ancient times, when the symptoms weren't fully researched. Next, we'll explore its transformation into more modern studies before finally considering the implications of the disorder on society and individuals. Now, research of bipolar actually dates as far back as the 1st century in ancient Greece with a man named Arrhenius of Cappadocia. Despite the ridiculous name, Arrhenius is a very substantial figure in the history of bipolar because, as according to the National Institute of Mental Health, he was actually the first person to differentiate mania and melancholy as two different states of one and the same illness. And with this, he was paving the way to further understanding of this disorder and was accordingly revolutionary because, as according to Healthline, many people around this time were actually executed for having bipolar and other mental illnesses in fear that they were possessed by demons. And this kind of bizarre belief continued for centuries. Still, some later advancements to understanding the disorder came in the 17th century with a man named Theophilus Bonnet. Bonnet linked these symptoms of mania and melancholy together furthermore by combining them in a condition which he referred to as manico-melancholias. And this was substantial because, as according to Healthline, in the 17th century, mania and melancholy were still widely treated as separate. And so even in this earlier period of our history when much was misunderstood about the disorder, efforts were being made to understanding it. But obviously there was far more to learn and many innovations were yet to be had. As time advanced, so did our knowledge, research, and overall understanding of bipolar alongside it. Specifically, some innovative studies of more modern times being done in 1851 with a French psychiatrist named Jean-Pierre Faure, who wrote an article on some of his research and found that some of his patients had a condition which he referred to as circular insanity, which he determined was swapping between extreme states of manic excitement and depression with periods of time in between. And this is actually considered to be the first real diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And furthermore, Faure was also the first to find a genetic link in those with bipolar, and that people with it could pass it down to their children. Fast forward another century from Faure's studies, and you have the 1950s. This is when a man named Carl Leonard introduced his concept of polarity and its utilization in understanding mental illnesses. This discovery of polarity greatly assisted both scientists and doctors in treating those with bipolar and is actually where bipolar got its name. These studies were also used by the APA in their diagnostic criteria for mental illnesses. One thing specifically the APA called for was for doctors to stop calling bipolar patients maniacs, which has allowed for a better acceptance for those with bipolar in both society and in the medical field. And so our modern studies have greatly advanced our understanding of bipolar and have made it to where now more people with the disorder are properly helped and treated. And all this has made bipolar one of the most highly investigated neurological disorders around the world. But even with all we know on the disorder, the effects it has on people are still great, with the National Institute of Mental Health estimating that around 4.4% of all US adults will experience bipolar at some point in their lives. And this huge, substantial number means that drastic effects are occurring in many, many lives, and many are even dying, due in part because of bipolar. And this is further backed by the National Library of Medicine's article, A History in the Pharmacological Treatment of Bipolarity, which was published in 2018, that found that in a group study on those with bipolar, that between 25 and 50% of the people in the group they analyzed had attempted suicide at some point. And so bipolar just has this huge effect on the mental well-being of those who are affected and can diminish and ruin their day-to-day lives. And just to add to all this, the National Institute of Mental Health estimates that around 83% of all bipolar cases are considered severe, and yet, despite this fact, less than 40% of bipolar patients in hospitals receive minimally adequate treatment. And so, even with all we know, many people continue to suffer because of bipolar. Bipolar is, all in all, a mental disorder that has been researched numerously throughout the centuries, where in ancient times it was feared and even demonized, into modern studies where it finally became more understood and where people with it were properly helped for once in their lives. But we also learned that even with all our modern innovations, that many people still die and suffer because of bipolar. However, if we can make an effort, if we can make an attempt at understanding the lives of people with this very complex mental illness, maybe the world can be a more welcoming place for those who have bipolar.